Everything is frozen right now, thanks to a polar vortex or something. I've driven twice in my truck to go get food, and each time I've told my wife that I'm technically an ice road trucker. In all seriousness, many of the roads in the United States are dangerous at the moment, and yet there are men and women out there keeping us all fed. Truckers day and night deliver all the things that make modern life cozy. Though with all that time on the road, I wonder what kind of creepy things they've seen. So here are some allegedly true and terrifying stories from truckers. Now let's begin. I have two stories. The first was paranormal and scary for other reasons. The second is scary and involved a trucker legend. I'll give you info on when the time comes. Number 1. I was driving OTR, or over the road, last year with a company that required trucks to have 2 drivers. When me and my co-driver met up, we set up a schedule. He would drive days and I would drive nights. For any other trucker reading or listening to this, I do actually like driving at night. I know, maybe that's weird. Moving on to the story, we were taking a load to Oregon from Missouri, driving on I-84 West in Wyoming near Elks Mountain. It was near midnight, and while the weather wasn't that bad, it could have been better. A little rain and wind, but again, not bad. I had hit my last fuel stop in the state, got some lunch, and rolled on. A little ways down, I saw a truck in the eastbound lane. It was every trucker's dream. A fire engine, red shiny chrome all over. The truck you see when you think of an 18-wheeler. It stuck out for 3 reasons. First, it was the only vehicle heading east on that stretch. Second, it was bright, like it was glowing, or there was a spotlight on it. And it had a huge cloud of fog right behind the cab, like it was pulling it along. This cloud stretched to cover the entire interstate, and as soon as the truck passed by, the fog was just gone. I looked in my mirror and didn't see anything. Then, not even 5 miles further, I was in a windstorm. I'm talking 60-plus mile-per-hour winds with gusts of 100-plus, pushing an 80,000-pound truck like it was nothing. As I was fighting to keep my truck on the road, I kept seeing the red one in my mind and thought maybe it was a warning. I yelled over at my co-driver to find the next best place for us to pull off at. 9 minutes and 7 miles later, we were at a rest stop. We stayed there until late morning, all the while fearing the wind would still flip the truck. Finally, at about 10 a.m., the wind died down, and my co-driver took off as we went to the next truck stop for coffee and food. I kid you not, along the way we spotted multiple other rigs on their sides, next to the highway, due to the storm. So for anyone looking to drive across the country, if you see an old red and chrome ghost truck, you might just want to pull off on the next stop. This second story happened this week as of writing this. It also happened on I-84, but in Oregon. The event was when I saw the black dog. Now some info on the black dog. It's a trucker legend. If you're running yourself into the ground by falsifying your logs or working a second job or something like that, then you'll see the black dog up to 3 times from what I found out. It's said you see him if you end up falling asleep on the road. It's an omen that a fatal crash is on the way if you don't get off the road. The first time you see it somewhere, it's a warning to change something or stop. The second time, it makes you stop, putting an obstacle in your way or somehow sabotaging your truck to make you come to a stop in a relatively safe manner. The third time you see it, if you can bypass the obstacles or repair your truck and keep pushing on, will be a crash or fatal accident, killing you in some way or another. Now here's my experience. I was driving on I-84 in Oregon, talking to my wife via headset. That's when I saw it. I couldn't make out its features because it was a black smoke cloud running across the road, but the cloud was in the shape of a dog, large enough to stand above the roof of the car in front of me. My immediate reaction was, crap, as a chill ran down my spine and I got a bad gut feeling. My wife heard my reaction and my tone change. I told her I saw the black dog. She instantly knew what I was talking about, and being more superstitious than me, she asked how many times I'd seen it. I told her once, then slowed down and turned my radio off. I began to watch out for another. Luckily, nothing came so far, but further down the road I did see a trooper with lights and sirens going back the way I came, followed by an ambulance. And I began to believe that that dog was not meant for me that day. Story number 2. I've been a trucker almost my whole life. On the road, you're prone to a lot of danger. Even with the amount of experience I've had on the road, it's made me realize you can truly never be ready for the most unexpected situations. I recall a time a few years back where I was making a trip from Seattle to Washington, D.C. I was transporting some sort of computer chips. The trip was around 3,000 miles, and I knew I was in for a ride. The ride was like any other, the same old, same old. Throughout the first day, everything went well. As night approached, the only memorable thing that happened was some sort of accident. I hadn't seen it happen, but I drove past the rubble scattered about the road. 2 trucks and a car. One truck had seemingly veered off the road onto the shoulder, running into a guardrail. Another truck had stayed on the road, but had notable damage on the front end, where the engine was located. What I saw next was the minivan it had been driven right into by that truck and absolutely crushed from the back end. It was on its side in a ditch by the side of the road. I could only imagine who had been in it. As I drove through the swarm of first responders, I saw people being airlifted while others had tarps put over them. It was a tragedy, one that I don't intend to get very descriptive with. At this point in time, I had become desensitized to the vision of fatal accidents. I had seen my fair share on the road, and did not look twice as I passed this one. It had begun to get darker at this point, as the night environment settled in. I had no trouble staying awake, but I couldn't brush off this odd feeling I had. That minivan had kept appearing in my mind. I didn't normally have difficulty forgetting about these sort of incidents, but my brain kept involuntarily envisioning what had happened when the truck had driven right into the back of that minivan. I could not shake this sense of sorrow that had come upon me. A recurring thought kept intruding inside my head. Were there children in the back of that minivan? I guess I'd never witnessed anything with a child potentially getting hurt before, so this was a new experience for me. I continued the drive, doing my best to not give any attention to these thoughts. Fast forward about an hour after this, and I'd gotten off at my exit, continuing down a more isolated road. With it being nighttime, the only forms of transportation I saw was the occasional fellow trucker. At some point, when I'd been on the road with no other vehicles in sight, I saw something straight ahead on the road. I made them out to be silhouettes. As I came closer, they appeared to be 2 children, their expressionless faces searching deep into my brain. I began to get chills as my head had suddenly become flooded with emotion. The image of that minivan started to surge back into my mind. Every detail of its damage came to me. The blood, the viscera, from which lay about the road, along with the rubble, had infested my thoughts. The visions and emotions I held continued to grow worse. Then it suddenly ceased. As fast as it came over me, it had left. How unexplainable it was that in that brief moment of time I'd felt so much. Along with my thoughts, the 2 children had vanished into thin air, leaving the road once again deserted. I was shaken. I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Not even a minute later, I knew I'd be sleeping that night rather than driving. I would just have to pick up where I left off once I woke up in the morning. I went to a truck stop and I called it a night. But the dream I had that night was extremely vivid. I found myself in a hospital. A child had been admitted into the emergency room, visibly in critical condition. I had only seen one child and questioned where the other one had been. Then it hit me. They didn't make it after the initial impact. As I continued to look on as the doctors crowded around the child, the same intensified emotion swept upon me, and as soon as that happened, I woke up. It was morning. I realized I needed to get back on my route. The day went by fine. Nothing ever happened again with my thoughts or sudden intensified emotions. It's been years since this experience, and I've never had anything quite like that happen since. I still have no idea what took place during that drive, and I've kept it to myself all these years. I figured this would be a good place to share it, if any. The one takeaway from this experience that I've realized is to always be cautious. Don't drive under the influence. Don't drive if you're tired. Don't do anything if you're unsure of what the turnout might be. It's best to play it safe rather than end up in serious injury or death. The events that took place during that period serve as a continuous reminder to me. I used to be a truck driver out of the US. I worked for a company that was hired by all sorts of people to drive shipments between states or sometimes across the southern border. I had that job for a long time, and 5 years or so in, nothing out of the ordinary happened to me. The scariest thing was probably when some guy at a truck stop retold Phantom 309 like it was his own story, before the waitress gave him heck for it. That all changed in the story I'm about to tell you. It was early July, I believe, late into the evening, and the sun was almost set, but I still had good light since it was summertime. I planned to put in another couple 100 miles before I pulled over for the night. I was driving down the road, blasting the FM radio as Carry On Wayward Son was playing. I remember it being right around the chorus when the signal began to get iffy. Even though the ground was nice and flat, the radio started cutting in and out. The lyrics would dissipate into static for a few seconds before snapping back in. It continued to get worse as I drove. Thinking that it was a range issue, I started messing with the radio dial. I turned it a few notches, landing it on 88.9. When I did, though, it was all static. No music whatsoever, even though I knew for a fact there was a station on that band earlier. So I swapped back down to the rock station I was on before. Annoyed, I realized that it was just noise, too. I gave the dash a bang with my hand, trying to get it to work itself out, but nothing changed. Out of frustration, I cranked the dial all the way to the right, capping it at the highest frequency my receiver could pick up. Then I noticed the static was gone. I relaxed, knowing my radio was picking up something. Oddly enough, even though there was no static, there was also nothing playing either. I checked the volume on it. It was at its normal level. I think then I figured my radio was busted, and I let it stay on, hoping it would magically kick back in eventually. Another 10 minutes went by. The sky had gotten a little darker, but my rig lights gave me all the visibility I needed. I was just getting used to the hum of the engine when, without warning, a sound sputtered out of my radio. It only lasted for a second, a single long tone. The best way I could describe it would be the noise an old-fashioned television plays when it can't find a channel. When it ended, I checked my radio again. Since I knew the receiver had to have picked up that sound from somewhere, I let it keep playing, mostly out of curiosity. Within 30 seconds, the radio made another sound, like the tone from before, but a lower pitch. It lasted for the same amount of time. I was unnerved as it kept playing. As time went on, the gap between the sounds lessened. It was getting to the point where they were playing one after the other consecutively. Thinking some station was doing tests, I decided to switch the receiver to a different frequency. I scrolled the bar pretty far, landing somewhere in the mid-90 range. Interestingly enough, that new station was playing the exact same noise. So I kept scrolling through. Eventually, I got down to the 80s. All the stations were playing the darned robotic tones. At that point, I didn't know what was going on. I was in the middle of the desert. I don't know much about radio, but it didn't seem possible a lone source could be occupying every FM frequency out here. I decided to heck with it. I was a second away from shutting the radio off when the tones cut out entirely. Like just gone, without warning. The sudden lack of noise made me stop my hand. Then something else came on the radio, only this time it was a song. It took me a bit to recognize the lyrics. After the third or fourth, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, I realized what it was. Scarborough Fair. It's an old-fashioned English song. To be honest, I don't really know what about. I just remembered as a kid, my parents used to dance to a record of it. Keep in mind that was back in the late 60s. So there I sat in my cabin, listening to this complete nostalgia trip of a song playing over the radio. The audio had a certain whine to it, like the song was being played off of a record. Just like I remembered, the singer was female, with a southern accent. Knowing full well what would happen, I scrolled my radio again. I went all the way up and down the range, and sure enough, the same girl was singing on every single station. It was around this time that I realized I hadn't seen any other vehicles. Sure, it was late, but this was a massive highway, not some back road in the desert. I would have expected to see another driver, a rig like mine or a normal car, but there was nothing whatsoever. I was unnerved, but I kept my eyes on the road, letting the song finish. It seemed to end normally, even though there was something haunting about the voice that sang it. A few seconds after it was over, I noticed something else. This time it wasn't on my radio, but out my window. Out of the driver's side, I could make out the faint outline of something in the night sky. It was maybe 50 feet above the ground, but it was big, I'd say 15 feet in diameter. It looked around from my perspective. It was black as a shadow, so black that it stuck out like a sore thumb against the off-blue sky. I watched it silently as it hovered above the ground. Going back to my dash for a second, it hit me. My truck was moving at 80 miles per hour, and whatever that thing was, it was keeping pace with me, maintaining the same distance parallel to my truck as I drove down the highway. Getting more and more freaked out, I didn't know what to do until the radio kicked back in. There was a series of another few tones. I wanted to turn it off, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I felt that if I turned the thing off, I'd anger whatever the heck was out there, so I didn't. I let it play. Soon enough, more music came on. It only took me a second to realize what it was. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. This track had the same whine as the previous one, again telling me it was being played from a record. The ominous piano of the song was, for the first time, terrifying to me. I decided to look out my window again, and as I watched the shape, I realized it had changed. It seemed to be pulsating along with the song. It wasn't changing color, per se. It just looked like the black material of whatever it was got brighter each time a key was struck. Imagine holding a black sheet of construction paper up to a light. That's the best way I could describe it. I think at this point I began to accelerate, exceeding the speed limit, but the thing effortlessly kept pace with me, not falling even an inch behind, as it continued to pulse and glow to the piano of the song. A few minutes in, the music suddenly cut. There was this incredibly unnatural noise on the radio, again hard to describe. It was a voice trying to speak English, I think, but it just couldn't get it. Think of a woman trying to speak, then slow it down, distort it, cut its pitch, whatever. It was terrifying. It kept repeating the same syllable over and over. I was frozen as I listened, unable to make sense of it. It was probably said 30 times before I caught on. It was trying to say being. There was no context. I was clueless as to what it meant, and just as I wrapped my head around the word, the voice stopped. Static returned. The radio buzzed for a second before cutting back in. This time it was so different. Have you ever seen those edits where someone cuts a bunch of different words from various clips and strings them together to make a sentence? It was like that, only the sentence made no sense. A whole bunch of voices, all female, kept saying random numbers and letters, one after the other. A6, L43, Z5, K886. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I could see the shape pulsing in tune with each syllable as it was spoken through the radio. Then, without warning, it stopped. The radio returned to its static buzzing. Looking to my left, I could see the thing as it followed me, maintaining its speed. Suddenly it grew in color, changing from a black to a radiating hot white. I couldn't bear to look at it any longer. My entire cabin was lit up. I remember doing my best to not touch the steering wheel. As I covered my eyes, I hoped the rig would remain straight on the road long enough for me to recover. And sure enough, it did. Maybe 15 seconds later, I blinked as the darkness of the night was back. I gained control of the truck again. I turned to look outside one last time, and thank God there was no giant black shape hovering in the sky. In its place, though, were heat waves. I could see the deep turquoise of the night sky distorting because of the ridiculously hot air left where that thing had been. I pulled into the next rest stop I saw without hesitation, staying awake all night thinking about this. I could not come up with a single explanation that was realistic enough for me, nor have I been able to all these years. I used to expect some government agent to come sit me down one day and debrief me about the ordeal. But that never happened. Whatever that shape was, I have no clue. How it maintained a good 80 miles per hour without making a sound, I also don't know. But I can reasonably say that the tech involved is far beyond anything we have that's public domain. Maybe it's all some twisted government experiment. I don't know. But I'll leave you with this. I still have dreams from time to time where I'm driving down a big road at night and that exact woman's voice comes on the radio, singing Scarborough Fair. I always wake up when she finishes the song with "I must know the true love of mine." Story number 4. As a diesel tech for nearly 11 years officially, and while working with my grandfather and father since I could hold a tool, I've seen quite a few things. As for me, I'm rather average in height, about 5'9", but I'm stocky and built like a logger. I don't chase monsters or mysteries. Most of the time, the mysteries I have are, how the heck did you do that while trying to fix old, tired, heavy equipment? But as I started working out of my own toolbox and truck, sure, there were some odd people I had to perform miracles to get things to work again. But there were a couple of creepy encounters. One time, I got a call at about 1 in the morning in the winter. A trucker was broke down on a highway about an hour away. Being self-employed, I would take whatever calls and income I could get. I've even taken a few jobs from animal rendering plants, and I had to wear 2 layers of coveralls and rubber gloves, yet that terrible smell still permeated into my hands and clothes, and it took weeks to get it out. Anyway, I drop out there. The call was placed somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. Those highways can be pretty quiet that late at night, and it's usually always an inky black night with rain or snow, or a mix of both. It was not hard to find the truck on the side of the road, as it was basically the only thing out there at the time. I pulled in ahead of the truck and backed up so I could get my tools and light equipment close to it. I met the guy, and wow, did he smell. Like he had not been in a shower for months, and it was hard to be close to the guy. I asked him my questions, what was going on. Turns out some of the air controls in the cab had broken and were causing a lot of alarms to go off. Being a truck from the early 80s with a sleeper cab, so it has a bed as a part of the cab for long-haul drives, it's definitely bound to happen. So he allows me up in the cab to do my work. I begin taking apart the dashboard to replace the hose fittings and such. Well, remember how I mentioned he smelled badly? Well, the cab was much, much worse. I was gagging and taking gasps, trying not to blow chunks. I tried to finish up quickly. Eventually, I was laying back on the floor of the cab, cleaning up my work and such, when I felt something start to rub and roll across my chest, like someone was running a hose across me. I sit up, and it's a freaking python. Never once did he mention there was a python in the cab. I'm not necessarily afraid of snakes, but when something like that is trying to coil around you to get warm, it would freak anyone out. I said my curses and rushed to work faster. The old trucker was laughing at me and watching everything unwind. Then after he had his giggles, he grabbed the python and put it back in its cage in the back. I finished up and got out, and he said, "You think that was scary?" Well, I got body parts in the back. At that point, my heart stopped. I'm on a dark, quiet highway alone with some smelly trucker in the middle of nowhere, and he says something like that. He may have been joking, sure, but I still didn't know why he smelled the way he did. I go back to my truck and take a moment to breathe. I run up to Bill on my tablet and go back to the guy. He pulls out his log sheet and his wallet. Sorry about Bill. He got out and likes to hide in the dash when it's cold. Oh, and don't worry about the body parts. I'm hauling those up to the medical college. I just sighed and got my payment from him, then left. So the guy and his python were body haulers. That's nice. I ask now when a trucker calls me if they have any pets in the cab so I can be ready for it. And later on I found out that guy likes to screw with people, and that's why the local shop gave him my number. Lucky me. My other event was a few years ago. I got a call from a local logging company needing someone to fix some really old equipment. It turned out that many people don't know how to fix anymore, and they wanted me to fix some of the vandalized equipment they had. It's something of a specialty of mine, fixing old things that people no longer know how to fix. I got the GPS location and was deep, deep into the Cascades. I took the long drive up there. At that time, I was carrying a .45 for protection on jobs, as well as an AR. I've had a few close calls with cougars and black bears, so being that far out in the woods, I wanted to be prepared, especially if I had to camp in the mountains. I also had an Arctic sleeping bag, a lot of water, and a couple of MREs just in case. I got to work and tore into the old logging equipment and trucks, stuff repurposed from military surplus it looked like. After a couple of hours, I finished up with my work on the vehicles. It was really late, and the crew was all left for the day, except for the owner, who stayed a bit longer to help me with doing final adjustments. I was packing up and I did my paperwork, and finally the owner had left. We were so far out there that cell phone coverage was really spotty, if there was any at all. I got ready to go as the sun was setting, and well, my truck's battery had given up the ghost. Well, it was too late now to try to get it started, so I prepared for a night of camping in my truck on a logging site. Not that I didn't mind camping or roughing it every once in a while. It's still annoying to be stranded that far from home and civilization, I'm sure you could understand. I got a small fire going with all the scraps of trees and such. There was plenty down here. I sat down on a log next to me and got my MRE cooking in its bag. I could hear deer moving about, small rodents making nests in the down foliage. Owls were hooting and screeching in the night. The crickets and other bugs were singing their songs. It would have been beautiful out there if it hadn't turned so creepy. Because what happened next was all those sounds I just listed completely stopped. All at once, as if someone just pressed the mute button, it was completely silent. The only thing ringing in my ears was the sound of the fire popping and cracking. Keeping my eyes peeled, I slowly finished my food and moved a cut piece of wood so my back was to my truck and chambered my weapons. I grew up hunting. I learned from my elders that when the forest goes quiet, there's some sort of predator in the area. Several hours went by in that night with this insane silence hovering over me. Every so often I'd interrupt it, placing more kindling in the fire to keep it alive. Then suddenly, off a ways down the mountain from the road, I hear a whistle that sounds like an owl's screech, but it didn't sound right. Then there was another one further up the mountain. At this point, I threw on more wood to try to get the fire to light up more in my area, keeping any wild animals at bay. Plus, I wanted to give myself a buffer zone to see any eye reflections with the fire's light. I gripped my AR tight, and I stood up. Suddenly, masses of rocks began to fly down the mountain, hitting the equipment and at my feet. Many of the rocks were softball size. It even broke some of the glass I had replaced that day. At that point, I let off a few rounds as a warning. Everything stops and it goes quiet again. No more stones flying down at me. But maybe half an hour later, in the stone-cold darkness, I hear bang, 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 as if someone was taking a wooden bat against a tree. That same noise was also coming from elsewhere above me in the woods, like it was just over the crest of the hill. Then I heard thumping like large, heavy footsteps, and then it would all stop, and the maddening silence would return. I stood there waiting, as if something was about to break from the edge of the fire and start charging at me. Then I noticed two reddish-yellow dots in the hill, staring down at me. Something was looking in my direction. I could see them watching me, blinking. I wanted to shoulder my weapon and let loose with the trigger, and then something in me said, "It's not the one you see you should be worried about. It's the ones you can't see." So I just remained calm and stood there, watching those eyes in the dark, watching me. It felt like I was living a nightmare. I felt so helpless next to a fire armed with a rifle, and feeling like any moment, no matter how many rounds I have, there was nothing I could do to get away. I simply kicked on another piece of a log and continued my staring contest with whatever that thing was. Eventually, the eyes began to move and disappeared behind something, and never returned that night. I spent the rest of the night keeping the fire going, watching and listening, and soon, to my great relief, the sounds of the forest returned. When they did, I felt safe enough to crawl into my cab of my service truck and finally get some sleep. Next thing I knew, I was awakened by the owner of the company knocking on my window. I nearly jumped out of the passenger door. He asked me why I was still up here, and I told him that my battery went out, and I could not get a cell signal. He then asked me about the few rifle casings I left out there and the broken window. I gave him the full story. He gave me a cup of coffee as he stirred up my fire and got it going. He dragged over another log and sat down on it, and then he gave me his story of another mechanic that had stayed there with them. The mechanic the next day quit and loaded up his camper and never returned to the woods for work. It was the same thing, rocks flying, noises in the forests going quiet. They helped me jump my truck, and I later got going. It was that night that I stayed there that has me staying out of the woods overnight at all costs. I do not do work deep in the woods anymore. Now they either have to bring it to me or it has to be close to home. Things go down in the woods at night. Certain creatures don't want you around. This brings us to the end of today's episode. If you enjoyed these stories, then hit the like button, leave a comment, press the notification bell, and subscribe to our channel, and we will see you in our next story.